It is Perplexed versus Couch Pepega.
All right, so we're probably going to see one of those big pulls as we've seen almost all teams do on the left side here. We both of them already using that Lightfoot potion. We see Divine Field pull everything, even the Colossus on top, as we see Couch Pepega do the same thing. Couch Pepega also using the Bloodlust for this pull.
Yeah, now something that's really interesting here as well as we move on through the dungeon. I want to point something out. It's a skittish dungeon, and there is no Tricks of the Trade or Misdirect on the side of Perplexed, so Divine Field's going to have to get all of the aggro on his own, which, you know, can be a problem. On top of that, I wonder how they're planning on doing some of the snapping mechanics in this instance too, because we've had very good point of views of hunters misdirecting mobs to snap to the tank, and then of course we see the Rezon pull where the hunters will misdirect Rezon to the tank, which will then snap the tank with all of his trash down to Rezon. I wonder how they're planning on doing that without a misdirect. It'll be interesting to see. But already right away, this first pull of the instance, the double DKs for both teams, absolutely smashing all the trash pulls that they literally pull the entire room of, and moving on up to Priestess's room already.
Yeah, and the difference, as you mentioned, with the misdirect, we have the Hunter on Couch Pepega's side, so they definitely can do maybe some bigger snapping pulls on their side, while Perplexed does not have this option. Of course, you can still just have the tank pull everything and then snap, but of course that will just take more time, and you need a Lightfoot potion, and I'm not even sure if you can reach everything, so definitely a little bit more difficult for Perplexed. But they have the Demon Hunter, which gives you that magic damage increase, which buffs both of their Unholy DK, so they probably have more damage compared to Couch Pepega, even though Hunter may be making up for it. Not really sure, depending on how the pull is going to be. I think their comps are very similar.
Yeah, very similar in their overall damage output for sure. That was kind of weird. You know, you saw Couch Pepega actually finishing off Voidweaver Mouth here before Perplexed did, but their tank spent a little bit of extra time before the pull just getting ready, and they actually ended up pulling the boss and all of the trash about 10 seconds later than Perplexed did. So interesting to see that from them, you know, in these dungeons where, you know, 10-15 seconds can be the difference between a team winning and losing. You really don't want to see teams wasting time like that. But so far already in this Atal'Dazar, you know, not really too surprised, like we mentioned before this match started. Couch Pepega is, you know, they're a seasoned team. They have a lot of practice in these dungeons. They already have base strategies with most of their members coming back from last year. It's not surprising to see them playing this well so far.
I think the difficulty by pulling the whole trash with the Priestess is that the bursting lines up directly with the transfusion from the boss. We saw on Perplexed side, they had all the bursting stacks, and then you had the transfusion by the boss, and it looked very, very scary. They did manage to out-heal it, but I feel like that might just be the reason why Couch Pepega chose to pull the boss a little bit later, so it just doesn't line up both of these AoE abilities. Maybe it was just too scary for them to handle. While Perplexed, one thing to note about them is that they have not used their Bloodlust yet, meaning that they probably are doing this dungeon so fast that they need to save the Bloodlust for the very last boss for the Awaken pull.
And here we see the snap down. They're opting not to snap right on top of Rezon. They're just snapping down by falling down, and then they'll pull the boss afterwards. Not as efficient, but maybe they just decided having a Demon Hunter for the extra magic damage taken debuff that they bring for the Unholy DKs is the better play. So that's kind of the main usage there of bringing that Demon Hunter. They felt that they could make this pull work without the misdirect, and it looks like they are dealing with it just fine. But another thing as well, that's just tiny problems for Couch Pepega as we see the Hunter misdirect pull come out for them, so they're able to pull Rezon quite a bit faster than we saw Perplexed pull. A little bit of problems on Priestess Alunza for Couch Pepega. They didn't kill Priestess Alunza with the second transfusion. She was still at 16% when that second transfusion cast ended, so they must have messed up maybe 1 or 2 debuffs on the first transfusion, or just not quite gotten enough boss damage in, which is weird because you'd think with a Hunter you'd get more boss damage in, but probably small little technical mistakes there from them.
Yeah, I agree, as Perplexed is pulling some of these Sky Screamers on top of Rezon now. Interesting to see that Ching is kiting the boss a little bit on their side. Maybe they just want to reposition it to get it to the stairs so they can also pull those Sky Screamers in. Because, of course, the Fixate ability from Rezon is not actually being dealt with by those teams in the MDI. They're just using their Shadow Melt to get rid of it. And you can bait the Fixate by having 2 players just run out of range while everyone else just stacks on top of his hitbox, and then it will be casted on one of those 2 players that are out, and therefore you just send the 2 players who have Shadow already out, and then they'll just use their ability, so the Fixate just doesn't come out at all.
Yep. So pretty much no mechanics on Rezon, just a giant patchwork boss, and they can easily pull trash on top of him and cleave it down with those double DK comps, get more boss damage out from their Fester Might trait, giving them a bunch of strength. So good to see both teams taking advantage of that. And you can see because of the Hunter misdirect snap, they were actually really able to come back. By the time they pulled this boss, by the time Couch Pepega pulled the boss, Perplexed were already at 70%. And they've already come back. Rezon's at 20% for them by the time Perplexed has pulled the boss. So they're doing a good job catching up in this dungeon right now. I'm actually really surprised. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm too surprised, but because of the history that we keep talking about, but they are definitely playing a lot better than you would expect a 7th seed team to play against the 2 seed here. We're seeing a lot of time spent for Perplexed there, sitting, waiting to gather this pull up on the side of their team. And because they're just sitting here for a solid 20 seconds, that's letting Couch Pepega back in. They must have needed cooldowns on the warriors in order to set up this pull.
Maybe they were missing the Lightfoot potion on Divine, because that's definitely something that they definitely need to do the snapping pulse. Not going up, everyone going down, full team wipe coming in by Perplexed. This was, oh my god, this is a huge wipe. So Couch Pepega actually has the chance to come back in this dungeon, and they can be the ones winning. They have 0 deaths still on their side, and they are doing the snapping pull with the Hunter, making it so much easier. We talked about this, right? Perplex does not have the misdirect, no Rogue, no Hunter, so they had to wait for the Lightfoot potion, Divine Field doing the pull, but something went wrong and they just all went down immediately. Now Couch Pepega has the chance to come back because they have this easier way of doing those pulls because of the Hunter's misdirect.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what exactly happened there, because it looks like he got in the snap position before people started doing damage. But the problem with those toxic swords is if you don't properly snap them, they can jump to the members of your team, which is what we saw happen there. And everyone just instantly died to the jumps. They didn't quite get the snap in place. And like we've mentioned, having a misdirect or tricks of the trade to instantly snap everything with no problems, with no potential failure, it just makes life so much easier. But going for the same pull a second time here, no problems this time, no toxic swords jumping around. Looks like they're going to get it down the second time around. But I mean, the major takeaway here is those 5 deaths on the board in addition to the time loss setting up that pull. And these bursting stacks are going down, but man, that was close. That was a 10 stack of bursting that almost took them out there. Yeah, I mean, that's just really unfortunate to see. Yeah,
and Couch Pepega also choosing to do this middle pack. And this looked like a very long pull by Couch Pepega, but look how much percentage they have. They are 94% now. This snapping pull that they did, they just constantly had the Hunter pull more trash on top. You constantly had the Hunter go out, misdirect more trash on top of the tank. Just keep on misdirecting. As they were done with some of the sword packs, they kept on misdirecting more, and that's why it looked like a really long pull, but they just kept on not resetting, and they had this middle pack on top. Just a very efficient pull by Couch Pepega. I really like this. As they're moving on, they only have to do the bosses now and their Awaken mobs, and they will have all of the percentage that they need, while Perplexed still needs to catch up, of course, because of this huge wipe that they had. They're dealing with a trash back here, as Divine actually drops really low.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because we still haven't seen like a prevailing better strategy come out in this dungeon yet. We've seen these 2 particular strategies from most teams, where one team will do what we just saw Perplexed do. They'll run up that staircase, pull that trash, and then they'll opt to double shadow meld this trash pack in front of Volcall. And we've seen this other strategy from the side of Couch Pepega, where you'll opt to pull Breaker of Heroes into the boss, so you don't have to worry about shadow meld skipping. And you also have to worry about one less Awakened mob. Now you do lose a little bit of time killing this Awakened mob, as you see Perplexed is pulling Volcall beforehand, but you also don't have to pull that trash pack at the bottom of the staircase, which can be a relatively difficult trash pack, as we saw Divine Field almost going down for Perplexed on their side. But Couch Pepega is pulling Volcall probably 10 seconds after Perplexed, which is well within that 25-second extra death timer that Perplexed has on the board, so this is an incredibly close match right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is still a 25 seconds difference in favor of Couch Pepega. And if you deal with less Awaken mobs in the last boss, you can just also focus more damage into the boss, meaning that you'll just kill the boss faster with less Awaken mobs, because you don't have to finish off the difficult ones, as Perplexed probably has to do on their side.
Oh no!
Oh, the totem healed on Couch Pepega's side.
The totem healed!
No! Oh my god, this is such a huge time loss. Time waste, I would have to say, because this is something that should not happen at all in an environment like this in the MDI. This is a mechanic that we usually don't talk about, just because these MDI teams are so coordinated, they can definitely deal with this mechanic. But Couch Pepega having a heal go off, meaning that all the totems heal and they have to do it all again.
That's unfortunate. I saw that first totem go to 1%. I'm like, is that dead? Is it casting? But I couldn't quite see it on our POV here. But yeah, that was like last second because the other two totems got to 1% right as it healed. So they're going to have to go through this entire set of totems again. Whereas Perplexed already has the boss down to 30%. And this is definitely Perplexed in the lead now after after those totems healed. Like, that's small mistake that you don't like to see at all.
This is such a mistake as well that you're just gonna remember forever, right? You do all of these difficult pulls and you just pull off perfectly, steer your devs on their side, and then you mess up something like this, such a like simple mechanic. It's so unfortunate, but maybe just a miscommunication going on, maybe someone just proccing something on a totem, you never know. Maybe a bunch of gushing wounds procced on a totem and they didn't manage to stop it. But yeah, unfortunate for them as Perplexed finished off Volcal now. They're doing a trash skip here. They probably are going to use their Shadow Miles to de-aggro that trash pack once they are over and started that RP that spawns the bridge, the stairs, sorry. And yeah, they saved their Bloodlust all the time for this very moment. In the end, if you look at the time now, they could have used their Bloodlust at the start and have it again now, but that's obviously not how they planned this dungeon to go, and this is why they didn't use their Bloodlust yet.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering what the reasoning for that is, right? Because I could see it being something like you use your cooldowns in the first trash pack, and then you have to wait for your cooldowns for the Priestess of Lunza pull afterwards anyways, so popping Bloodlust on the pull doesn't really matter. But Swag going down for Perplexed on the top there, so that's an extra death on the board for them. They did have the Battle Res to get him up immediately, but you have to keep in mind that it's an extra 5 seconds on the board. Couch Pepega has now finished off Volcal and will be making their way to the final boss. They do only have 2 Awakened mobs to deal with on their side, whereas we see that we have the 3 for Perplexed, and they do have the Breaker of Heroes there with no Hunter Pet Taunt, so Divine Field is going to be taking all of that damage from the Tank Buster, so you see them actually cleaving it down. Divine Field is dropping incredibly low here, sub 20%, but it looks like he's going to be able to heal back up. But if he's this low when the next Tank Buster comes out, he might go down.
This is super scary. Maybe they can have Swag taunted with his Netherwalk. Yeah, the Netherwalk is being used. I think he did taunt that very Spirit Breaker. As you can see, the debuff on Swag as well, just so Divine Field does not go down without his defensives available anymore. They only have the Blood left now, which should be okay for them to deal with. This room, you have to kite the spiders anyway, so the pools on the floor don't actually matter as much here, just because you're kiting the spiders and then you're just also automatically kiting the pools as well, and everyone is stacking up in melee anyway, so not as big of a deal, as they're probably just passively cleaving down the blood and just focusing all their damage onto Yesma. They want to deal with these ads though, as they're getting awfully close to the boss.
Yeah, but this is an incredibly close match right now, because remember, we have those 30 seconds on the board. Couch Pepega is only 20% behind on the boss right now, and they've already dealt with one of their Awakened mobs. Once this blood goes down for both teams, it's a single target race on the boss with Couch Pepega only 20% behind on a fortified boss. We might see a 7th seed take a game off the 2 seed in the first game of this series. This is going to be really close. Yeah,
that's very possible. I mean, we have this Hunter damage, which is huge, consistent single target damage. And as you mentioned, the 30-second timer, this might just be the difference that it makes. And the perfect run by Couch Pepega here with the 0 deaths. Of course, it wasn't perfect because of the totems that healed, but perfect when it comes to death counters. So 30 seconds might be the time they need to finish the boss here. And Perplexed, I mean, they have a lot of single target damage though. They're maximizing the single target damage so much, as you can see with these ads not even being focused by the soul rend here that is going out. They just kite the boss away from them, just passively cleaving them down with their eye beams from Swag Rush as Yasma is about to go down, and then Couch Pepega will have 30 seconds to finish their boss.
All right, 30 seconds on the board. Yasma's down for Perplexed. We're going to keep an eye on Couch Pepega. They need to get through 25% of the boss in the next 20 seconds now. And this is really close. They might get a burst of single target damage here. The Beastrorath is up for the Hunter. He's going to be doing damage right now. The cooldowns are up for Elmo as well. This is going to be close. 10% on the board. 10 seconds left. This is going to be neck and neck. 1% per second here. Yasma's down at 4%. 3%. Come on, needs to go down. They got it.
Oh my god!
Taking game 1 off Perplexed by 2 seconds.
Wow, that is incredible. 2-second difference between those two teams. Couch Pepega pulling it off by a hair, even with that huge mistake they made on Volcal with that totem. How are they able to pull it off there, Tettles, at the last minute?
I think we're gonna need admin confirmation on the time there. That was really rough. Perplexed. Wow. Had such a major issue. I don't even know what happened. I think Swag may have ripped Threat off Divine whenever Divine got in the snap. Maybe Divine was a little bit slow getting to that point because of like Lightfoot potions or something like that. Man, Perplexed really kind of threw to Couch Pepega, but okay, it is confirmed Couch Pepega did win that match. Oh, that was
by 2
something.
seconds. By 2 seconds. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
super incredible. I think also the fact that, I mean, you know, like you were saying, Nagura, making such a silly mistake like that isn't really something that ever happens in these competitions. That's a pretty, like, easy mechanic, and they managed to mess it up, still take that victory. How do you recover as a team mentally when you do something like that mid-dungeon?
I'm not sure how you do, because if you do a really difficult pull and something goes wrong, it happens, right? Because like any small mistake on these difficult, huge pulls that they're doing can just cause a huge team wipe going in. But then when you make such a tiny little like mistake on these totems, I think that's just an incredible mistake to recover from. But this team, they have been competing with the 4 members of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue a lot of times already, so maybe they just used to not thinking about those kind of things, just moving on after the mistake, trying to recover, and that's what they did. And they did manage to finish off the boss before Perplexed and beating the number 2 seed. So from here on out, they just need to focus on the next game. This is an incredible motivation boost for them, I think, winning against the number 2 seed.
Absolutely. I mean, this team has been playing together for quite some time. Couch Pepega, some of the members finding themselves through LFR some time ago, I believe, in Legion, and that really just goes to show how much synergy, team synergy can help in these situations. And it sounds like, Telly, you have a little bit, Tettles, you have some insight into that last matchup.
Yeah, so basically the matchup was really neck and neck even all the way through Priestess Alunza. Then it started heating up whenever Couch Pepega was doing the very traditional Monk misdirection snap where they'll tag Razan and snap the tank to the boss. That was pretty big time saving wise, but Perplex was already a little bit ahead just by the compositional differences. With that Demon Hunter on bursting, it allows you to be able to pull a little bit more aggressive because you know the bursting is going to come through at the exact consistent time. And then after that, you saw Perplexed have just such a major blunder with their snap. I still think Swag may have ripped Threat, and all the Sards may have come out of the snap spot is what may have wiped him. Divine may have died. It's really hard to tell what exactly happened because it happens in such a fraction of a second. Beyond that, it looked like Couch Pepega was just going to take it. But they have Bokal's Totems heal, and then at that point, it's a photo finish. It's like a literal race to the very end that is almost impossible to call. And it comes down to those 30 seconds of deaths that could have been avoided by Perplexed had they not had that full team wipe. And had Swag actually just not died on the opener to Yasma too, that also would have been the difference.
That's an oof.
Yeah, just knowing that one death is the difference between you winning and losing, that's a little unfortunate. But we're going to have to be able to see if they can, come back from it, right? We talked about this a lot last weekend, the mental game of, oh yeah, you know what? We messed that dungeon up, but we should be the better team. We're the 2 seed. We can come back and play better in this next dungeon. We'll see how they can play here.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the team we're used to seeing. Like, Perplex is the team that pulled off that crazy kiting with the Awakening strategies on Freehold in the first EU Asia Cup. This is usually a very clean and precise team, especially to be able to pull off such a risky strategy like that. And we are going to be moving on to Motherload, it looks like. So the affixes on this one are Tyrannical, Bolstering, and Grievous. Wait, I'm not. This is not what Motherload. Hold on.
Workshop.
Workshop. Thank you. Sorry. So Workshop, and that's Fortified, Teeming, and Quaking. So looking at these affixes, Nagura, what do we think we're going to see coming with these teams? Maybe some strategies that we want to clean up. Looking at that next map here.
Well, we've seen a Workshop being played before by the boys in Pain for Femme, and they've been running this triple hunter composition, as we've seen also in King's Rest and the Time Trials. So I do believe, since both of these teams also played the triple hunter in King's Rest, it's very possible that they'll just play the triple hunter in Workshop as well. King's Rest Workshop, is just a dungeon where everything is kind of straightforward. Very, very similar to King's Rest, where there's not that many different kind of pulls that you can do with the trash. You just need to go from boss to boss, and almost all the teams have done the same pull so far. But we've also seen lots of teams have problems with Kujo, having full team wipes going in there, and we've seen teams fully wipe on the Awakened pull on the last boss. So I think for this very specific dungeon, it's just very important that you have a 100% clean run and don't make any mistakes. And both of these teams made mistakes in Atal, so we'll see how they do here.
Yeah, I mean, is there even really room for a different sort of strategy with Workshop? Like, even with the obelisks?
I mean, since it is teaming, there is some things that you can pull a little bit differently, but ultimately, there's only room for you to like really skip one pull, and it just happens to be that final 5-pack of trash that sits right in front of King Mechagon because of how deadly it is. Ultimately, there's not too much difference in strategies. You really want to see the teams be able to pull off like pulling all of the trash near Cujo and try to optimize that pull as quickly as possible. That's going to be like a pretty big breaking point. And then just kind of how quickly they're being able to deal with the bridge all the way up to King Mechagon and then getting King Mechagon pulled. Those are the two pretty pivotal points, I think, in the map.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw Bob struggling on that section. Was it in that last one? It can be maybe a bit of a time sucker. So we'll definitely see how these teams shape up here on Workshop. They are loaded in, ready to go. Couch Pepega up 1 against Perplexed.
And here we are, the triple hunter composition coming out of both teams, as we've seen before as well. Now, here at this very start, nothing too crazy that can go differently between the two teams, as all they have to do is pull this trash and then the bosses will spawn.
Yep, they just gotta cleave it down with the hammer. It looks like we're getting in position for that on the side of Perplexed right now, whereas Couch Pepega's already dealt with the trash. It's already dead. They just started the RP probably 10 seconds ahead of Perplexed, so already a very small lead for Couch Pepega before the first boss is even pulled. And really that kind of comes down to RNG. Sometimes those tonks like to cast right when you pull them, and you just get unlucky with that. Looks like it was a little bit of RNG in the favor of Couch Pepega. But this is going to be an interesting matchup. You know, there's no real differences in their comp right now. The triple hunter for both teams with the same exact comp for tanks and healing. It's going to come down to pure execution of their strategy. I think the best strategy has already been figured out for the most part for this dungeon. Something that I'm looking forward to, though, is Quaking affix on Cujo. Because if you get that Quaking right when the flame, what's it called? The flames from Cujo come out, you could just get one shot. But already trouble for Couch Pepega as Elmo goes down on the first boss here.
Yeah, so we saw them going a little bit too close to that edge. If you go too close to edge, it will just knock you away. And I'm not really sure what happened with Elmo, if he got hit by the hammer or not, but definitely some problems for them. Also seems like they don't want to use their battle rush just because it's only the platinum pummeler alive, and that one just doesn't really need any additional damage, as you just remove the plating with the hammer and then it just kind of goes down, and that's why they choose to not use their battle rush. But yeah, this is time loss for them, as they also didn't commit their bloodlust, while Perplexed did use their bloodlust on this boss.
Yep, and good usage of that hammer means that they killed the boss at the exact same time as Perplexed anyways, so definitely didn't need to commit the battle res to it. And like you mentioned, saving the bloodlust is a big deal. They have that for this Cujo pull that we see a lot of teams go for, especially when you like to pull a bunch of trash on top of the boss. Can be incredibly dangerous. We've seen a lot of team wipes in that particular part of the dungeon, so having bloodlust available is a big advantage for this team. And we'll have to see whether or not either of these teams are able to pull it off cleanly. Now, it's important to mention we did have a bug fix in the past week where Cujo will now make sure that he finds a target available for the crate to drop, so we're not going to have any of those problems ever again. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And we'll see that right here.
You ever hear about caster curse, Sarah?
No, that never happens. That never happens. I don't know who says caster curses are a thing, but they definitely aren't. Another death, though, as
so we see another death
down.
going in on Couch Pepega. Unfortunately, looked like his turtle either ran out too early, or he popped it too late, as these living waste they explode on death, and that's why all of the hunters use their turtle. As you can see, all 6 hunters have their turtle on cooldown. Now, now Cujo is being engaged on Couch Pepega's side, while Perplexed seems to just nuke down some of this trash first before they engage. So interesting to see that Couch Pepega can actually deal with this because they have the bloodlust available on their side.
Oh, another death as they're going down. Looks like he went down to that frontal from the tank, the waste processing units. So not exactly the best execution again from Couch Pepega here as he goes down. Now they do still have a slight advantage. They still do have the battle res available should they choose to use it, but I have a feeling that they're probably not going to use it until all of the trash is dead, maybe until after the next Roaring Flames cast from Cujo, just because of timing issues. You want to make sure that, oh, never mind. unstable temporal device is being activated by Tom on the left there. Venting Flames is coming out. Probably not going to take the res right away. Going to wait till after the cast to take it. And they'll have him up alive. But in that time, Perplexed has caught and passed up Couch Pepega on Cujo's health.
Yeah, and I mean, even if they didn't have any big losses with the 3 deaths they had so far, it's still the 15 seconds on the timer. And we said this is just a dungeon where you can't really have any sort of innovative strategies just because it's such a straightforward dungeon. There's not much you can do to make your strategy faster compared to the other team. So you just need to execute everything better. And it's just about damage and execution compared to strategies like in some other dungeons where you can really make up a lot of time by just pulling differently. So the 3 deaths really matter a lot here in Workshop. So they want to make sure that they execute everything perfectly from here on out, as they also have no more battle rests available in case something goes wrong. Perplexed, down in Cujo now, they already moved the boss to this exit area just to not waste any time when the boss goes down.
It's important to mention that one of the reasons hunters are particularly good for this boss in general is that they're sort of abusing an aggro reset that you can do on this boss. One of the more dangerous abilities that Cujo will do is that explosive leap where he'll target multiple members of the group and he'll jump to each member of the group. Now, he'll always jump to the person furthest away from him, and if the person who gets jumped to drops combat via either Feign Death, Shadow Meld, or Vanish from a rogue, he just won't jump to anyone else afterwards. So one of the hunters is running as far away from the boss as possible, popping Feign Death after he starts to jump, and then he won't hit anyone else with the explosive leap cast. Just another little manipulation that you can do when you run this comp in this dungeon, and both teams pulled it off pretty well. No real problems from the explosive leap. Now, it's important to mention that Perplexed is a pretty solid bit ahead now at this point. They've killed Cujo probably about 20-25 seconds before Couch Pepega has, and on top of that, they have the 15-second advantage from the 3 deaths on the board on the side of Couch Pepega as well. So Perplexed firmly in the driver's seat at this point in the dungeon.
Yeah, definitely all eyes on them for now. This pull here, not very difficult to handle as long as you just make sure you finish up the robot that does the AoE first, so you don't get the AoE twice. This short out, as you just see it happening right here, dropping the group very low. Just want to make sure you don't have 2 of those casts going out, but with the amount of damage they have with these triple hunters, shouldn't be a problem at all. And then afterwards, the next thing we want to pay attention to is the next boss pull, where almost all of the teams we've seen so far, they pulled the trash pack that is in front of that boss, in front of the 3rd boss on top. And that's just a very dangerous pull to do, just because there's so much damage coming in from the boss already, and then you have Quaking and you have all the trash mechanics as well. So we just want to make sure that these teams execute this properly, and if Perplexed has any sort of mistakes there while Couch Pepega doesn't, that's definitely the chance for them to catch up again.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's definitely a lot of breaking points left in this dungeon where they can mess up, especially if one of the teams tries to go for that RP skip and not pull this obelisk. Yeah. It looks like Perplexed is doing the obelisk, so they don't have to worry about anybody accidentally getting hit by one of those patrolling robots. But they will have to get mouth ear kicks here, and as we've said before, with triple hunters, you can't exactly get every single one of Void Weaver mouth ears kicks. So we might see some line of sight plays from them here as they run around the corner, just so they don't have to worry about those casts, or they might just DPS it down as well on the way.
Yeah, so one thing I want to mention here, while this mini-boss on Couch Pepega's side is doing this discharge, which is the AoE with a safe zone where you have to run to, earlier we saw Pain for Femme's hunters outrange it, and I thought it's a little bit weird just because hunters, they don't lose damage while moving anyway, so I thought it's a bit weird that they outrange it. But now I realize why. It's because it's Quaking, and with Quaking, and you have to be in this very small area here to dodge the AoE, it might cause some issues, and you might just get one of the Quakings on top of the tank, and maybe go slow, and that's why they just have the hunters outranges. I really like that by Pain for Femme.
Yeah, it's just a super clean play, and it makes them... It makes for a solid time save for them. But they are going for this big pull with the trash into Head Machinist Sparkflux. Don't have the Bloodlust available, but no teams usually do here. They save it for the last boss anyways. We're going to see a lot of beast cleaving coming out here, and they should be able to deal with this pretty clean. Divine Field purely has threat on everything, and it's all getting slowly cleaved down by those hunters.
Yeah, so one issue here in this trash pack can be the debuffs that go out, the magic debuffs. They can be dispelled by Smog, and they can also be revivaled off. but as soon as you run out of dispels and as soon as you run out of revival, then you need to just out-heal that debuff. As you see, one of them just was on swag shot before he got dispelled. So that's one thing that can cause some problems on top of just all the other damage that is going on in this fight. I mean, theoretically there is no other damage in this fight as long as you avoid everything, but it can be very difficult to avoid everything when there's just so many things going on at the same time.
Yeah, and what better DPS class to dodge all the mechanics than with Hunter, who loses absolutely no damage from moving. They can just kite around and their pet does everything for them. Now, of course, as you go further on into the fight, more and more gears spawn, more and more of those orange circles spawn, so it's harder to dodge everything, so people will start taking damage, but Zamok has gone down. They'll have to get him up. They have no way of getting to him because of those flame bits. Actually, there are 2 hunters in that same pie slice as him, but they'll have to wait for the flame bits to go away in order to get him up. Or they just might opt to not res him at all, because like we've mentioned, most of the damage is avoidable damage here, and they're going to go ahead and finish off the boss before they even need to think about using their battle res. So not that big of a deal. It is 5 seconds on the board for the death, but he is able to release here once they're out of combat with the boss, which they are now, and they'll move on with the dungeon.
Yeah, one really good thing about Workshop is that you actually have good checkpoints for releasing, not like some other dungeons like Shrine, for example, where you spawn at the entrance almost all the time. But in this dungeon, you have a lot of checkpoints, so Smog just immediately releasing as soon as the boss goes down, because the checkpoint is right there as soon as you kill a boss. So well done by them, as Wolfdisk unfortunately got hit by one of these sonic pulses, but he is alive, and nothing too bad going on, as they also dragged this mob to the next pull. I like it. They dragged some of the mobs that they succeed during the last boss fight on top of these tanks to make it a little bit more of an efficient pull.
Well, the thing to remember is that hunters have access to the rapid reload trait, which whenever you hit 3 targets with your multi-shot, it reduces the cooldown of all of your aspects by 1 second. So their turtles come off cooldown faster, and more importantly, Aspect of the Wild, which is their main DPS cooldown, gets off cooldown more quickly. So I like that. That's an interesting small little play from them that might not seem like a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but if you look at that little leaf cooldown on the far right underneath Ashine and Swagshot, Aspect of the Wild is coming off cooldown in about 5 seconds for both of those players. So they'll have it up for this pull because of that one small play change that they made. That's, pretty cool on the fly changes from them.
Yeah, I really like those small little things, especially in a dungeon where you can't really change your strategy all too much, as we've mentioned a lot about this very specific dungeon. So just these small little changes, that's something we've talked about Method EU doing a lot. Method EU just had maybe one small thing they were doing differently to the rest, and it maybe only saved them 2 or 3 seconds, but in the grand scheme of things, it just really matters, and it just adds up. So I like seeing those things happen also by Perplexed on their side, as they actually dropped really low dealing with this trash back here, but they should be able to recover here as Divine Field managed to jump into that bubble to get the damage reduction.
Well, there's a lot of damage going out here, right? If you're not inside one of those damage reduction bubbles, you're going to take a lot of damage from those defense bots, ground slam ability that they do, but they're going to get through it just fine, no problem, no deaths on the board, and they'll go ahead and skip past this trash with all of their feigned deaths and shadow modes that they have available, and move on to the final boss, which will be the end of the dungeon here if they're able to pull it off. They do have their Bloodlust available, and they are going for, if I'm not mistaken, a triple obelisk with the boss pull. Yep, you see all 3 of those obelisks there, and they're going to go ahead and just pop their Bloodlust here and try to cleave down these awakened mobs before they get too much to handle for Divine Field.
Yeah, so it looks like all of the hunters are actually stacking up on top of the tank here, or most of them at least. I like this strategy just because not only are you baiting the sparks to the same spot, but you also bait the pools, because not only do the pools spawn underneath the blood, but they also spawn underneath players as well. So having those pools just be contained in one spot, it just makes you have so much more room in the rest of the fight, especially because this platform is just not very big. We also see the hunters, of course, using their defensives on their pets to be able to taunt that Spirit Breaker, so Divine Field does not have to deal with it. Divine Field still also has Shield Wall available in case some of these Spirit Breakers does go on him, so well done by them so far, as you can see some of the pets just being rest back up after they died.
Yep, Swagshot's still very low to that zap debuff. You can see he's going to keep dropping low a little bit, but he'll get a little bit of love from Smog there in the form of heals. But there's not that much damage going out here other than those zaps, so as long as that debuff is healed up, they should be fine. Both the Blood of the Corruptor and the Fear Mob are down. Only the Tank Buster is left. Of course, not that big of a deal because they can taunt those Spirit Breakers like we keep mentioning. And once that down, it's just a single target Fortified boss encounter, which hunters are very good at dealing with. Couch Pepega is now just getting to the final boss in Workshop, but they are significantly behind. They still have the triple Awakened mobs to deal with. Now, they do have their Bloodlust popped, but they have a lot of work to do in order to catch up here, which, let's be honest, on a Fortified boss, it would take a wipe from Perplexed for Couch Pepega to take this dungeon at this point.
Yeah, most definitely. And in the second phase here of this boss, on a Fortified setting, I doubt something goes wrong. Now, we saw one death already earlier for Pain for Femme, as one of the hunters was too close to this magnetic arm, so that's definitely something that can go wrong. But Couch Pepega has a much more difficult task on their side, as they have to deal with these Awaken mobs. And yeah, we just talked about how difficult these Awaken mobs can be, and as soon as you have a wipe on the last boss, you have to deal with all of the Awaken mobs again. Even if you manage to finish them off the last try, they will just respawn because they're bound to this last boss. So as long as the last boss is not down, they will always respawn. So wiping there, huge time loss. As Perplexed, they are on Omega Buster now, 55%, and the boss is just melting with the amount of damage they have coming out of these hunters.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just absolutely face melting this boss right now with those BM Hunter single target damage. I mean, this has been absolutely ridiculous with the amount of crit that they have at this point. They have almost 90% uptime on a ridiculous agility buff just because of the crit that they have. So yeah, they do a lot of damage, and this Fortified boss is being made quick work of, as Omega Buster's now down below 10%, and once he goes down, King Mechagon himself will be really upset and jump to the middle of the room, but he'll probably be dead by about the time he gets there anyway, and we're going to see Perplexed take this to a game 3 with a, relatively clean workshop after the early mistakes in Atal'Dazar.
Yeah, definitely clean. Only one death on the board from Perplexed, so that is going to be tying them up 1-1, Perplexed versus Couch Pepega. And, there were 3 deaths from the side of Couch Pepega, and that only ended up in a 10-second difference. Was that the determining factor for Perplexed's win here?
I mean, ultimately, it wasn't necessarily just the 15 seconds worth of deaths that Couch Pepega had. Couch Pepega's strategies for the first half of the dungeon were really good, but then I feel like they just started falling behind in damage. Maybe they have people who just aren't that comfortable with a triple hunter comp. That honestly very well may be it. Their strategies for how they did Cujo and how they were doing Platinum Pummeler and No Mercy absolutely should have won them the match. But they just weren't clean enough on that, so it should have set them even with Perplexed. But then they just started falling behind in the points where you just need more DPS, and ultimately they were just a little bit behind, I felt like, in damage.
Yeah, I mean, last time we saw Workshop earlier today, they were also playing triple BM Hunter on both sides. Zyro, is there another approach that these teams could take to this dungeon if they're maybe not so comfortable on that 3 BM Hunter composition?
We did see a lot of Fire Mage being played on this from the North American Cup last weekend, but really this dungeon comes down to, Hunter's just so useful for a lot of different aspects of this dungeon. We talked about it a little bit, being able to reset a lot of the damage and take on Cujo with Feigned Death. Just in general, Hunter has really consistent overall damage, so, and on top of that, it's not really a difficult spec to play. Anybody who's actually messed around with Beast Mastery Hunter on live at all knows that there are really only 3 or 4 buttons that you have to hit, so I would be really surprised if there was actually a comfortability playing Hunter, especially with the fact that you don't really get punished playing Hunter. You can do all of your damage consistently all the time while moving. I would say it's probably more familiarity with the dungeon problem is what it looked like from Couch Pepega, because you have to remember Mechagon still is a relatively new dungeon. It's new to the MDI this season, so even though they're a returning team from last year, they don't really have a built-upon strategy that they can work on. And they weren't in our MDI Cup in the first Cup 2 weeks ago as well, so they didn't have a strategy for then too. So I think that's what I'd chalk it up to for Couch Pepega. They just didn't look as practiced here.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess we'll have to watch these teams as we move further into the season here on Workshop. And Tuttles, it sounds like you have a clip you'd like to talk about.
Yes, so we have a pretty good replay about this. So Couch Pepega does 2 very interesting things, even though that they got kind of punished for it. So the first and foremost is how they were dealing with Platinum Pummeler and No Mercy. So whenever you use player models to activate the hammer, it makes the hammer do increased damage. They end up using most of their hammer strikes on a lot of their hammer strikes on the Platinum Pummeler and on No Mercy to be able to take it down. To the point where Az goes down on the first boss, and Perplexed and Couch Pepega still kill that boss within 2 seconds of one another, while Couch Pepega has one less person. That's a really good strategy from them. In addition to that, then they pull all the waste processing units into Cujo, where Perplexed takes something of a little bit more careful approach. Couch Pepega's strategy for those waste processing units looked very scary, and ultimately Az ends up going down again. They actually do have a battle res for him, so they shouldn't have been punished as much. And then ultimately, Perplexed just kind of started to build a lead based off just being able to be, like Zyra was saying, maybe it's a little bit comfort, maybe it's more DPS, maybe it's a mixture of both. It's hard to really say. But ultimately, Perplexed did start to slowly start building a lead because of how they were taking the back half of the instance and take that dungeon. The reason that I actually thought that Couch Pepega was a little bit less comfortable on the Triple Hunter is that Tomboy and Elmo are both very well... they're pretty good at melee DPS classes generally, so it kind of caught me off guard that I don't know, I just felt like they weren't playing Hunter to the same level as a Shine and Swag were playing Hunter.
Well, I mean, it makes sense if you're used to playing melee and then all of a sudden you're playing a BM Hunter. It is going to be a little bit different in terms of positioning.
You can play BM Hunter like a melee and just run around in melee. I mean, you don't lose any damage
yeah,
doing
also
so.
True.
I mean, usually when you talk about the difference between ranged and melee, the usual bit is that ranged players can't play melee because they're used to sitting out in ranged and being able to see everything. And once you're in melee, you're kind of up in the boss's face and you develop tunnel vision. Usually, melee players swapping to ranged is pretty easy, right? You have better awareness.
Maybe it's just difficult for me
I don't know.
whenever I try and play range.
I am just the biggest Couch Pepega whenever I have to swap to melee, and I will get hit by every single frontal, and thus I'm making a Beast Mastery. I made a Beast Mastery Hunter because I got hit by multiple frontals in Wakerest Manor. It tilted me.
Yeah, did you ever try playing melee in Maw Souls?
Oh yeah,
That was
No, I would not be as stupid
That
enough
was
to play
terrible.
that.
That was just a terrible dungeon, period. I know.
No.
I didn't mind that dungeon.
It was pretty, but that's the only thing I really liked about it. But anyways, we are going to be moving on to King's Rest, and the affixes we're going to be looking at are Tyrannical, Quaking, and Bolstering. And given that these teams are so neck and neck so far in this series, we are 1-1. Nagura, how are these teams going to be looking to get the edge over their competition?
Okay, so I mean, obviously Perplexed are the favorites here in this matchup just because they're the number 2 seed and Couch Pepega is the number 7 seed. This is their first tournament here in the Awakened season, while Perplexed already participated last time around. So in the end, Perplexed should be winning this next game, this number 3 game, as it is also a time trial map. It's King's Rest. They got a 20-minute time there, while Couch Pepega had 24 minutes. So number 2 versus number 8 in the time trials. So as long as everything goes well and Perplexed doesn't make any huge mistakes, it should be their game. But we've already seen them make mistakes, especially in this Atal. So in the end, if they make a mistake and it costs them a lot of time, like we've already seen Method EU make a mistake here in King's Rest, then it can definitely also just go to Couch Pepega, and that will be a huge upset.
Yeah. What about you, Tuttles and Zyra? Do you guys think that it's going to be Perplexed win here?
So, Couch Pepega got a 24:56 in KR, which makes me suspect that their best time included a wipe, because that's a pretty long time, especially for a team of their caliber. Mm-hmm. Where the time of 20 minutes and 14 seconds for Perplexed is effectively a perfect run, more likely than not. So I suspect that Perplexed is probably going to be a little bit more consistent with their strategies that they're doing in King's Rest, but with it being Bolstering, really anything could happen. I definitely would be foolish to not give the edge to Perplexed, but it would be interesting to see an upset.
What about you, Zyra? What do you think?
Well, I'm trying to go back through our previous cups last year to take a look at Buff Warner Frog's King's Rest runs, but unfortunately there's not that much data. I agree with what Tuttle said. It's probably a perfect run for Perplexed in time trials versus some somewhat scuffed run for Buff Warner Frog. Mm-hmm. Here we go. I have one run from that. They had a 22-minute King's Rest at some point last year.
Weren't they running like Fury Warrior in King's Rest?
Yeah, they were running. This was back when they were running double Rogue Monk. So yeah, Buff Warner Frog does have a pretty good. Couch Pepega did have some pretty good King's Rest runs last year when they were Buff Warner Frog. Mm-hmm. So they do have a pretty good foundation to work from. So I suspect, similar to what we were talking about from some of the teams in North America last weekend, I suspect that Buff Warner Frog's potential high-end King's Rest time is a lot better than what we saw from them in time trials. I don't know if it's going to approach that low 20-minute time that we see from Perplexed, though. So if we do get a perfect run for Perplexed, I think they're going to take this map, but I think we could be surprised by Couch Pepega as well here.
Well, Zyro, you know the way that we can be surprised by Couch Pepega is if people spam _couch _and_lamp : in chat.
What does
that even look like?
It's an emote.
Oh,
it's a couch.
It's just a couch and a lamp.
It's a couch and a lamp.
I don't know what I expected.
All right, well, hopefully Couch Pepega has the chat on their side for this one. Personally, I feel like it's anyone's game, especially given how, like you guys were saying, Method EU did kind of fall apart here on this map, King's Rest. And, we've seen a little bit of some difficulties coming out of Perplexed. So, I mean, we are tied up 1-1. This is a best of 3 series. So at this point, it should be an interesting series coming up here. Let's talk about their compositions. Do we want to talk about those and see how they're going to be utilizing those BM hunters coming up on this map?
Yeah, they're just gonna utilize that damage from the BM hunters and just, do a lot of damage.
Do a lot of damage. All right, well, let's see those BM hunters do a lot of damage. It is 1-1 Perplexed versus Couch Pepega on match point.
Yeah, so we're in King's Rest, and to be expected, to be honest, we see the 6 hunters here, the exact same comp being run by them also in the time trial, so no surprises here. As to deal with these minions of Soul, now these minions, you gotta be a little bit careful with them because they actually do apply bolstering, so you wanna make sure you don't bolster them up, and if you do bolster them, you wanna make sure you somehow drop the aggro, because you don't wanna fight them if they have all these bolstering stacks from the minions.
Yeah, that's definitely different from what we normally see, right? But that's just, yeah, like you mentioned, they're getting rid of the bolstering possibility right away here. Whereas Couch Pepega has just gone all in right away on this first major pull here. You can see Jing is already going and kiting around this circle here to not take too much damage, but they're going to have to make sure that their bolstering management is perfect here. Too much bolstering stacks on one of those champions means Jing is not going to be able to take any melees from them whatsoever. So he's going to keep kiting as much as possible here. This is incredibly dangerous. We'll see if they're able to deal with the bolstering perfectly here.
Yeah, this is such a huge problem because these mobs also have all different kinds of HP, and theoretically you just want to focus on the Witch Doctors because they're the most dangerous ones with the Deathly Chill cast and the Shadowbolt Volley cast that needs to be interrupted. You just run out of interrupts, especially because the Hunters have a little bit of a longer CD on interrupt compared to like a melee comp. So can cause so many problems here as you see these warriors here so bolstered up. Now thankfully the hunters can just stay away and they can avoid those tornadoes because these warriors spawn tornadoes. If you get hit by them, they leave behind a pretty nasty dot that's a lot of damage, especially with the bolstering stacks. So thankfully the hunters can just stay away and should not be getting hit by those.
But you can already see the difference in strategy here coming out from both teams. Perplexed has done a much better job of dealing with this trash. There was a lot less kiting coming out from Divine Field, and even though Couch Pepega pulled that trash pack first, Perplexed probably killed it about 10 or 15 seconds faster than Couch Pepega did. They just had a much better job with their tank doing damage and the kiting that was going on. There was a lot less damage needed from them as well because of the way they dealt with bolstering. So just better execution from Perplexed, and they're pulling the boss a lot quicker than we're seeing from Couch Pepega. Now also we're seeing a similar strategy come out. Their healer does go and pull those 2 animated guardians on top of the boss. This is incredibly good once again for the hunter with that 3-target rapid reload resetting, which means their aspect of the wild is going to be up all the time. So we're just going to see a massive amount of single target damage on the Golden Serpent from all 6 of these Beast Mastery hunters.
Yeah, one difference to note as well is the Bloodlust usage. Now Perplexed used their Bloodlust for the boss here, the Golden Serpent. They saved it all the way until the boss pull. Couch Pepega, on the other hand, they used their Bloodlust for this huge trash build they did earlier. So interesting to see the difference. It is a tyrannical environment, so both of it makes sense. Makes sense to use it for the boss, but also makes sense to use it for a huge trash pull. So we'll see Loda actually going down, unfortunately, for Couch Pepega's side. They're going to have to use one of those engineering rests to get him back up.
Yeah, just more problems for Couch Pepega. They've had these random single-player deaths on bosses in both the previous dungeon and workshop as well as this King's Rest. Not exactly what you want to see there. And your healer going down to that Spit Gold debuff is kind of weird because usually you think that they could heal themselves. You see him having to commit the Monk Bubble to Elmo there with that Spit Gold debuff, so he's having a little bit of trouble dealing with that single-target healing. Not quite what you want to see. But Wolf Disco also going down for Perplexed. These healers are having issues here.
Yeah, I mean, it is a tyrannical environment, so, and hunters, I mean, we've been talking about this the last time as well. They do have defensive abilities, but at some point, if you run out of, if you don't have Turtle ready, if you don't have Acceleration ready, and you don't have maybe Shadow Man ready, then at some point you just don't have any defensives anymore outside of your health pot. And some other classes just have so many more self-healing abilities, like a Demon Hunter with constantly getting less magic damage, constantly leeching themselves up. So some problems just because the Hunters maybe don't have as much self-healing as some other classes do. And Tomboy also going down on Couch Pepega's side. Without a Battle Rest available, they'll have to 4-man this boss.
Yep, and another random hunter death from Tomboy there. Just a lot of single target damage going out here. Not quite what you want to see, unfortunately. And even though Perplexed pulled the boss later than Couch Pepega, they have killed the boss first because they were able to keep their DPS alive most of the time with that one death from Wolf Disco. They are on now to this trash pull, and yeah, I mean, this section of the dungeon is going to be pretty much on rails here, but a little bit of a nicer time here for Perplexed here, as Mock doesn't have to worry about the Shadow of Zul ads like we were talking about earlier. He can just go pull the Guardians, whereas I'm interested to see what Couch Pepega is going to do, because they do still have the Shadow of Zul ads, I believe, to deal with at the start of the dungeon, whereas Perplexed doesn't, so it should be a little bit easier for them to pull those.
Yeah, it definitely looked like Perplexed is slower at the start, but just because of these minions, as you mentioned. So now Lota is away, but we also see the Hunter being away, so I assume... okay, so interesting. Now we have the Lota POV. Nice to see what he does. He had a perfect Rin going down. Looks like he's just DPSing them down himself. Unfortunately, didn't manage as he gets one fear going in. And yeah, this is a little bit of a time loss for them, as Lota has to deal with these minions himself. Hopefully they can deal with the minions before they go too close, because if they come too close, they will bolster this King trash back here.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Maybe they're going to try to finish off this trash packer, get it relatively low, and then once the Shadow ads come in, they'll just let them proc while the animated Guardians are still out of range. That's the ideal comp, but you just see the Binding Shot come out. They need to deal with those minions quickly before worrying about bolstering the animated Guardians, and they're going to do it right now. They're just going to run straight into the minions. Now, it looks like the animated Guardians were out of bolstering range, so they didn't get the bolstering stacks, which is exactly what they planned on doing. And yeah, I mean, you can see... This is something they've practiced. That was close,
yeah,
but they executed it well enough to where they didn't get the bolstering stacks, which was the main objective there. So they were able to deal with it without having to worry about that at all.
Yeah, so now we see them just wait for the next gauntlet to spawn. Here in the tournament realms, the gauntlet is not random, so it always starts with the top left pack, and then it goes counterclockwise. So those teams know exactly which pack is going to be next. We also see the King cast this lightning channel here, which unfortunately with these triple hunter comps, there's not many abilities they have to interrupt this. They have the Ring of Peace, but it looked like Lota needed the Ring of Peace to deal with the Guardians so they don't get bolstered by the minions, and therefore they didn't have the ring available to get rid of this or to interrupt this lightning cast.
Yeah, that's interesting that they don't have that available. Not quite what you want to see, but there's not really a whole lot to talk about at this point in the dungeon. These guys are just on rails at this point. They're making sure they get through these predetermined trash packs. Of course, you got to remember on the tournament realm, this does go in a set order. There's no RNG to it, so they know exactly which order it's going to be. It's in a counterclockwise order around the room. So at this point, Perplexed is on the final set of this trash, and Couch Pepega is just now dealing with the second to last version. So Perplexed has a pretty solid lead here. Pretty huge advantage for them coming out of this room.
Definitely, and I mean, even though it looked like they were slower at the start, it really seems like the way they dealt with the minions just was so worth it by them to be able to get them dealt with immediately, even though they had to use their Shadow Meld to de-aggro those bolstered Guardians, but it was still just much faster and less riskier as well compared to Couch Pepega's strat when they almost bolstered the Guardians on their side. Now we'll see how they deal with these fluids here, as the fluids of course also bolster, and you want to make sure that you don't bolster these constructs because they have a lot more HP than them, but it looks like they definitely have a lot of single target focus damage with this Hunter comp, of course.
Oh yeah, for sure. You can just hit multi-shot every 4 seconds, keep Beast Cleave up, and focus most of your single target damage into the construct, and that's what we're seeing them do exactly right here, with good kiting on the embalming fluids as well. And of course, because the embalming fluids spew out that green goo at ranged players, and hunters can do all of their damage on the move. It's complete. There's no damage loss for them at all. They can just keep going, keep DPSing, no major issue whatsoever, and they're going to deal with this room nice and clean. Now, of course, we're used to seeing teams just pull all of this trash with the boss, but of course you can't do that on bolstering because you don't want to bolster the boss 20 times because there's absolutely no way you'd kill a 20 bolstered boss. So they have to go through this room a little bit slower than we'd normally see on a non-bolstering affix, but, you know, that's just the name of the game. Different affixes make you play the game differently based off of the way the dungeon's set up.
Yeah, the only other way, I mean, you could maybe do this whole room in one pull though, but that would be so much more difficult. You have 2 constructs, you have so many droplets. Maybe some team is able to pull it off to get a little bit of a time edge compared to another team, but it's super risky because if you mismatch that bolstering a little bit, it's going to cost you so much time, especially because it's very similar to Sanguine even. If you just don't kill the mobs at the same time, or you get a bunch of bolstering stacks on the droplets or in the fluids, the amount of time you lose, even if you don't wipe, you just lose so much time because of the HP that they're gaining from those bolstering stacks. And at some point, if you have, let's say 10 mobs, it's just impossible to kill them all at the same second, and therefore you are going to lose time. We also saw an ad spawn here on Machimba and Perplexed side, but we saw the immediate in-cap come out by Smok, so they don't have to deal with it. I think this is exactly what happened to Method EU as well earlier, right?
Yeah, the strategy here that we see a lot of teams use on Machimba the Embalmer is whenever he entombs one of the members of your group, if you're able to break him out instantly, like the second he goes into the coffin, the boss is so scared and so intimidated by the fact that you're able to instantly break your teammate out that he no longer does abilities for the rest of the fight. He just stands there meleeing your tank, which it looks like Perplexed has pulled off here. He's not casting literally any other abilities. Now, of course, because everyone clicks the tombs at the exact same time, sometimes you click the wrong tomb first, which spawns one of those mummies. But because they have multiple forms of pure CC in the form of freezing trap and paralyzed from the monk, they don't really worry about them at all. It just nets you a positive gain over the rest of the fight, not having to worry about any extra damage intake. So once again, good execution from Perplexed. They know what they're doing on this fight, and they're performing admirably.
Yeah, and one thing to note as well is, of course, if you do this strategy and Machimba is not casting any of his abilities anymore, you have this huge amount of damage incoming on Divine Field, because this boss already does a lot of damage to the tank when he does his normal ability casts, but when he casts abilities, the tank at least has some breathing room because the boss is not meleeing while he's channeling the fluid, for example. But if you do this strategy, the tank is constantly getting melee hit without any sort of breaks, so that's why the tanks definitely need to be careful with this boss. But Divine Field not having any sort of issues as they move on and do one of the most difficult packs in this whole dungeon, really. You have 2 casters here which constantly cast the Spectral Bolt, and you also have a Berserker. And it seems simple because there's only 3 mobs, but they are so dangerous.
We'll see if Couch Pepega was able to pull it off as well. I haven't seen any abilities come out from the boss yet, but they didn't just spam click every single one of the coffins. They waited until their member made the coffin shake before clicking, so they didn't get any mummies. And it looks like he's not doing any abilities, so it looks like they pulled it off as well, so good execution from both teams. But Perplexed is just so far ahead right now. They're probably a solid minute and a half ahead just because of how fast that they've killed things with, I don't know, their familiarity of the dungeon, the consistency at which they've been pulling and managing their bolstering. They're just playing incredibly well so far in this King's Rest.
Yeah, I agree, and it's so much time you can make up with good execution here, especially just because of the bolstering affix as we've been talking about. Wolf going down, unfortunately, at the very end of this trash pack, but because they're out of combat, they can just use out of combat rest by Smok as he gets it back up right now. And now they want to probably skip this brute that is patrolling past here. This is why they go all the way to the left. They don't have... they do have Shadow Melt available, so the 3 hunters are playing Dwarf, so they have the Stone Form racial, but they have Feign Death, so they don't need the Shadow Melt, and Smok and Divine Field, they are playing Night Elf, so they'll just go ahead and Feign Death and Shadow Melt off the aggro from this trash pack that they just skipped.
Yep, perfect execution once again from Perplexed as they just get ready to pull this council boss. They have everyone here. Shadow Meld is on cooldown for most players, but they will have the Feign Deaths available as well to get rid of this Axe Toss debuff once the boss is dead as well. So we'll keep an eye on that, who gets the Axe Barrage debuff. Now the thing is they don't have Turtle, so they can't pre-turtle the debuff if it goes on them, unfortunately. But they also, it looks like they all have, I believe they're all dwarfs here as well, so they can remove the debuff as well, which is something that you like to see. Let's take a look at that. Yep, all of them are dwarves, so they can remove that bleed as well. So we shouldn't get any debuffs on any of the hunters at this point.
Yeah, so no debuffs on them, and I mean, the debuffs can cause some problems because it's a tyrannical environment, right? And you also have Quaking. Now, Quaking, of course, did get nerfed and doesn't do its damage anymore as long as you don't hit anyone else with it, but it still does the interrupt of your cast. So if the healer gets a bad Quaking timing while having to heal the Severing Axe, then it can definitely cause some issues. Smok is the one being affected by the Severing Axe. Smok, not a dwarf because he needed that Shadow Melt, so he's a Night Elf, therefore not being able to get rid of the Severing Axe, but did manage to out-heal it, and now they're fighting Sanacel, while Couch Pepega is dealing with those 2 Awakened mobs.
Yeah, so once again, small differences in strategies because people still haven't quite figured out what the best way to pull the dungeon is on that Awakened affix. We saw the Skystep Shadow Meld from Perplexed where they just skipped all the trash and skipped both Awakened mobs, and we're seeing both Awakened mobs being pulled by Couch Pepega. Now, of course, Perplexed is going to have to deal with more Awakened mobs on the final boss, but we've seen a lot of teams able to pull off that 3 or 4 Awakened mob pull with the final boss. So if you're able to pull off the more difficult, more scary pull, you know, why spend time dealing with the Awakened mobs like we're seeing Couch Pepega have to do here?
Yeah, and we see this strategy come out of Perplexed again, where they just don't deal with the explosive totem. So we saw the explosive totem actually go off. They didn't switch their pets to kill it before the explosion comes out, just because they knew they're gonna survive it. So they, of course, know how much damage this explosive totem does, and they tested it beforehand. They figured out, okay, this doesn't kill us, so we don't have to lose damage on the boss to switch to it. Even if it's just a small damage loss, right? Because this totem does not have a lot of HP, it's still a damage loss. And even if it only makes up 2 seconds that you save, it's still 2 seconds that you wouldn't have otherwise. These small little things I like to see by Perplexed and some other teams as well that have done this in the past. And sometimes it might just be those 2 seconds, as we've seen in this Atal earlier, right? The 2 seconds was the difference between winning and losing in the Atal that we see between those 2 teams before.
Yeah, you know, sometimes you lose a dungeon by 1 death timer and you're the death that lost the dungeon and you have to live with that for the rest of your life.
Aww.
I wouldn't know anything about that myself, of course. I've never made those mistakes. But, you know, same. Yeah, but, you know, sometimes you just don't want that to happen. It's really unfortunate. But, I mean, Perplexed, these guys are absolutely crushing this dungeon right now. Already on the 3rd boss at the council. And I'm actually interested to see, maybe we'll see that low 20-minute pull in live competition from them. That'd be great to see. It's just so difficult to pull off your time trial times whenever you have such a blazing fast time in time trials in this live aspect that we have in the tournament setting.
Yeah, and I mean, I just want to talk about this whole Hunter comp again, just because not much to talk about, as Perplexed is just doing this skip here. Once we'll see, they'll move on. They don't need much trash, actually. They need the Awaken mobs and they need Soul, and then they're done. But yeah, the Hunter comp, just, we've seen this twice in a row now in Workshop and in King's Rest, and it's very unique for sure that they're running the triple Hunter. But specifically in dungeons where you need this like high damage single target focus, especially in King's Rest and Workshop, and then on top of that we also have Bolstering, and Hunters are just so good to deal with that, especially because on the tournament realm they can just choose the corruption they want to use. So they can just pick and choose that severe corruption, that crit increased corruption, and just completely make use of their abilities of lowering their cooldowns, having Bestial Wrath ready all the time, having their Aspect ready a lot more, and then they have the Asteroid traits as well that interact with their crits. So just perfect setup for these Hunters to get this maximum amount of single target focus damage, and that's why we see the Hunters, especially here in these single target heavy dungeons, and also the Bolstering dungeons as we've seen in the Motherlode earlier.
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure. And I mean, you really have to admire just the clean execution once again from Perplexed here. These guys are playing absolutely out of their minds right now. Perfect mob count as well as they move on towards Shadow of Zul. And of course they still do have those Awakened mobs with the final boss to finish off their trash count right now. So literally all they have left in the dungeon right now is Shadow of Zul and the final boss, and they're saving the Bloodlust for the final boss again. Now of course a non-Tyrannical Shadow of Zul shouldn't be too much of an issue with these affixes now that Quaking doesn't actually do any damage, but we had some nightmares in the previous MDIs with the previous version of Quaking in this King's Rest on Shadow of Zul. There were some tanks that were going from 100 to 0 almost instantly.
Yeah, Shadow of Zul can definitely cause some problems still. And again, Quaking doesn't do damage anymore, but it still interrupts the healer. So if the healer just is about to finish a cast and you get the Quaking and he doesn't get the heal off, it might still cause some issues. But as long as you deal with your defensive cooldowns properly and you have good communication with your healer, they should be able to finish this off. They also got a very unlucky spawn here right next to the boss. But yeah, there we go. Shadow of Soul going down. Now it's only the boss and the Awaken mobs they have to deal with. Now, they have a lot of Awaken mobs here. They have the Bloodlust available, but they need to be very careful how to deal with all of those mechanics from the Awaken mobs, because this is no joke.
Yep, and as Perplexed prepares to pull the final boss of the dungeon here, if you're interested in checking out what kind of gear these guys are wearing, or why 3 hunters, or why the hunters are doing so much damage, you can check out their gear, their Azurite traits in the description below. right next to the MDI talents and gear section. There's a link to it right there. You can check it out there. But King Dazar is now pulled for Perplexed. They've got 3 of those Awakened mobs, Voidweaver Malthair, the Beckoner of Chaos, as well as the Blood of the Corruptor. Actually, I lied. They've got all 4 Awakened mobs here, which is incredibly dangerous. A lot of extra damage coming out in the group here, especially Divine Field. The Monk Bubble has gone on top of him, so they'll have to make sure that they're able to keep him alive for Zamok. But it looks like they're getting Voidweaver Malthair down first, which is normal that we see. They only have those 3 Hunter interrupts on top of the tanks, so they're not able to get every single one of the interrupts. It makes sense that they're going to cleave him down first. And then, of course, the Fear Mob will go second because they only have a certain amount of dispels available for the group. And then once the Beckoner of Chaos down, the actual overall damage input is vastly reduced.
Yeah, but so many things going on at the same time. And this is also a reason why they're running dwarves here on the hunters, because the dwarf racial does also get rid of any magic effects, so they can get rid of the fear by using the dwarf racial, and this is why all of them did use it for that specific ability. And now the Tankbuster also being just taunted by the hunter pets. Hunter pets can taunt the Tankbuster off for this Spirit Breaker ability, which does a huge amount of damage and also leaves a damage taking increased debuff on the target that it's being used on. So that's why we see the Hunters using their pets to taunt, use the defensive cooldown on their pet so it doesn't go down, and even if it goes down, they can just rest the pet back up. So well done by them to handle these Awakened mobs. This is definitely very difficult just because there's so many different abilities. And even if you have a solution for each ability, it's still so many things happening at the same time, and you need to comprehend everything at the same time, and any sort of small mistake can cause a team wipe. If a taunt doesn't come out from a hunter and the Spirit Breaker goes in the tank and he goes down, it can just be a chain reaction and everything can be a huge team wipe immediately. So that's why we see a perfect execution by Perplexed. Well done, as they're dealing with Asala now and Reban just being cleaved passively, and now they only have King Dazar left.
Yeah, I mean, it's really... I feel like it's understated sometimes how difficult the multiple Awakened mobs on top of the final boss pull is. Sometimes there's a lot going on, like you mentioned. And I remember during our raid today, during our raid this week, back on Tuesday, some of the players in my guild were talking about how they started dealing with that. I mean, some of them are using nameplate add-ons, like Plater, to just color the different Awakened mobs different colors, so they don't really have to look at the names anymore. They can just see, oh, blue nameplate, that's the mob I gotta kick. Or purple nameplate, that's the Blood of the Corruptor, so I need to DPS that down. They're doing whatever they can to make their lives easier, to make sure that they can cleave everything down. There's a lot that they have to do in order to actually focus in and make sure they're executing perfectly. But King Dazar is now down to 10% for Perplexed, and you know, it wasn't a low 20-minute clear like we would have liked to see from them, but still, sub 22 minutes in tournament play for Perplexed is incredibly impressive, and they are taking the series 2-1 against the 7th seed in Couch Pepega that was actually pretty strong.
Yeah, that was a pretty strong run for Couch Pepega, but it wasn't just quite enough